What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from the Mtg. We like it at Magic, and today I've got a deck that I've been trying to bring you all season. This thing has been on the docket on Patreon like 3 times at this point, and it keeps getting second or third, and I really want to show it to you, so I just can't contain myself any longer. Here's Blue-Red
Conjecture.
That's right, Conjecture, the Mirari Conjecture to be exact. Not only is this a pretty sweet late game value engine, but it also just begs to be built around, so that's exactly what we've done here. We've got 16 instants and 16 sorceries that we can get extra value out of by returning them to our hand and double casting them once we get to the 3rd chapter. Now, there's a lot of ways that these effects can be good for you. You can get back a counterspell to help cinch the game up. Sometimes being able to say no just one more time is all you need to really help close a game out. So there's that, but you can get back removal, including sweepers, which is especially relevant because it's always nice to be able to wipe their board and then get your sweeper back into your hand before they've effectively rebuilt their board. So that's pretty sweet play. Plus, this can get things back that help draw us cards to get even more advantage. But if we're going to play this card, we need to break it in half. So in this deck, it's kind of part of our win condition too, along with 2 other cards, Fight with Fire and Banefire. Now, fair warning, these cards are basically our win condition in this deck. You know, we just want to kick a Fight with Fire while we're on the 3rd chapter of Mirari Conjecture and just dome them for 20, game over in most cases. Banefire can do the same thing for a couple of extra mana, but with the added insurance of not being able to be countered, which is pretty important. And I know that 5 win conditions doesn't look like a whole lot on paper, but don't worry about it. In a deck with 4 copies of Conjecture, you can get these back almost at will, and it's not uncommon to cast the same copy of Fight with Fire, kicked 2 or 3 times over the course of a game, and sometimes you'll have to do just that to take out decks that want to play Approach of the Second Sun, or various life gain decks that are heavy white. There are a lot of those, especially at the F&M level right now, but don't worry about it. Even against those dedicated life gain decks, all you have to do is cast Fight with Fire kicked twice, and that's actually easier than it sounds. But the entire rest of the deck has to be devoted to pulling this ridiculous plan off. You know, Fight with Fire can't actually be kicked until turn 9 at the very earliest, and Banefire wins the game even later than that. It's not uncommon to win the game on turn 12 through 15 or 16. This is a really, really slow rolling deck. So we have to keep control of the board for pretty much the entire game. So the rest of the deck is more or less just counter spells and removal and some ways of refilling our hand. So let's run through these real quick, starting with the 3 copies of Magma Spray, which is really important right now for dealing with Scrap Heap Scroungers, making sure Earthshaker Kenra never comes back, and, you know, Champion of Wits never comes back. It's relevant against the zombie deck, you know, gets rid of Dread Wanderer forever, doesn't let them recast zombies that you killed with it, with their Liliana, you know, there's a lot of reasons to play a Magma Spray right now. But we're also going to play 4 copies of Abrade, because mostly we hate Heart of Kiran, but we also want to kill Godfar's Gifts and Aetherflux Reservoirs, of all things. That's kind of important now for some reason. So there's actually a few different artifacts that we want to get out of there as early as possible. And Heart of Kiran is the biggest one, because boy, we hate that card, but it's nice to have a flexible card that can deal with multiple problem artifacts and little creatures at that. And yeah, I do think it's right to play the Magma Spray in a Braid package. I know it's really tempting to play the, you know, Burn to the Face package and play Shock and Lightning Strike in these slots instead. That way, obviously, these wouldn't be dead against control. You could just target their head with it. That's nice. Hitting in the mouth with Burn is always nice. Don't have that option with these, but I think it's important enough to take out Embalm and Eternalized creatures and Scrap Heap Scroungers and stuff to play Magma Spray in this deck. And I also think it's important enough not to die to Heart of Kiran really early in the game to play Abrade. So yeah, after rotation, we can play these, you know, Shocks and Lightning Strikes, hit control opponents in the face, and then get those spells back later with Mirari Conjecture triggers and stuff, hit them in the face again. That all sounds really, really nice, but in the time being, I think it's more important to play a spread of options that hits important targets like Spray and Abrade. But we're also playing 3 copies of Blink of an Eye, which is a standout card for the deck. Very important, this one, because it helps us deal with a bunch of things that we have issues dealing with otherwise. You know, problem cards like Teferi, Karn, other non-creature permanents like artifacts and enchantments and stuff like that. There's a lot of them lurking about, and Blink of an Eye can buy you time and tempo against all of those. Plus, we've got the time-honored trick of Bounce plus Counterspell, which is surprisingly effective. Plus, there are a bunch of creatures that we have problems with it too. You know, anything above a certain toughness, especially Galta, we have issues with, and honestly, being able to bounce a Galta during their attack step, wreck their tempo, and get a card out of it is just a really, really good play. You're going to be able to draw that extra card a lot of the time, and being able to wreck their tempo, get a permanent off the board for a turn, and it not cost you a card is really, really good for this deck that needs to hit its land drops and needs to keep up the onslaught of board control, so not losing a card to a removal spell is an important deal. But we really need to run some board wipes in this deck because aggro is pretty good against us. You know, these heavy red aggro decks that you see a lot at your F&M, they have a really, really good matchup against us that we need to shore up as much as possible, especially in game one. So to start things off, I'm going to run 2 copies of Sweltering Suns. Very, very good against problem decks, especially the mono red decks, but it also kills Vinemare out of the mono green decks, which is a card we also have a hard time against. And when I say a hard time against, a Resolve Vinemare will just kill you. Like a lot. So you've got to make sure that card doesn't stick around if it actually hits the board. Sweltering Suns is a good way to do that, but I really like the way this plays with Conjecture for sort of inverse reasons. You know, if you cycle it in the early game, you can get it back if you need to wipe the board later, but, you know, if you cast it in the early game to wipe the board, then you can get it back later as a way to draw more cards if you have no other options. So there's at least that too. You know, sometimes both of those situations will come up, but mostly we need a board wipe in game one against a low-to-the-ground aggro decks that are very good against us. But I like sweepers so much, I'm going to play a couple more. We're going to play 2 copies of Hour of Devastation in the deck too, because Hazoret, Ronus, these are problem cards against us as well. We want to be able to actually remove those once they hit the board. Hour of Devastation is pretty good against that, and it clears the board of pretty much anything else in Standard. Aside from, you know, Galta, Torrential Gearhulk, there's a couple of things this doesn't hit, but for the most part, this is going to clear everything away. I'm especially going to miss this card once rotation hits because I won't be able to be like Hour of Dev anymore, and that's always been really fun. So I'm going to miss you, buddy. This is actually a really effective sweeper right now. But as I mentioned before, we're going to play some counter magic in the deck because, you know, it's just best to not ever let problem cards hit the board in the first place and actually have to answer them once they do stick. So with that in mind, we're going to open things up here with 1 copy of Negate. Relative rarity, a main deck negate in Standard, but I actually think this is the right call. The main reason we're playing this is to help push through a kicked fight with fire against other counter spells for as little mana as possible. That's the main function of this card, but there's a lot of incidentals. You know, it counters Teferi and Karn, other Planeswalkers. It counters, you know, Godfar's Gift, Refurbish, Gate to the Afterlife, a lot of cards that people are playing right now. A bunch of problem enchantments and stuff, History of Benalia, and importantly, it counters Heart of Kirin as long as you're on the play. So all of that is really, really good. I think Negate is worth a main deck slot. We need a good old-fashioned hard counter in the deck, so I'm going to run 3 copies of Disallow to deal with, oh, say, whatever. You know, there's a lot of problem cards for this deck, but the good news is that most of them cost more than Disallow costs, so there's a good chance you'll be able to counter them by the time your opponent has the mana to actually play them. Spells like Hazoret, Rekindling Phoenix, Galta, unless it's an especially early Galta, but most times, even if they get Galta as early as possible, we can still counter it if we're on the play. Same thing with Ronus, we counter that on the play, you know. There's a ton of cards that we might have some issues with, but mostly they can all be countered by Disallow, so why not run at least a few copies of this so that we don't have to worry about those cards in the first place. Especially late in the game when you have enough mana to cast Conjecture and Disallow in the same turn sequence, that's really powerful. But we're also playing 2 copies of Commit to Memory, which is sort of a counter spell, sort of a removal spell, or at least the first half of it is, you know. This can effectively counter, quote-unquote, a Carnage Tyrant, which just about no other card in Standard can do. So that's pretty hot, but this can also take out any problem permanent. We actually have a fair amount of answers to just, quote, problem permanents in this deck. Between Blink of an Eye and this and just counter spells, there's a lot of ways to deal with cards that we should have a hard time dealing with. So I like that about Commit, but the memory half is obviously pretty sweet too. You know, if we get late enough into the game, and again, this deck gets really, really late, it's not unheard of to be able to cast a memory and, you know, actually have mana left to cast some of the spells that you just time twisted for. So that's pretty sweet, but the best part about Commit to Memory is that while it's in your graveyard, it counts as both an instant and a sorcery, so either of the first 2 chapters of Conjecture can get this back, which is really relevant too. But to finish the main off, we're going to play 3 copies of Divination and 2 copies of Secrets of the Golden City. Now, I've seen a lot of different numbers here. You know, some people play 4 copies of Secrets, 3 copies of Secrets. So you can kind of tweak this to your liking, but really we just want 5 divination effects I know these cards don't look especially powerful. It's because they're not, but they are a concession for a few reasons. You know, again, this deck works until turn 1,000,000, so we're going to have to refill at some point. You know, we answer most things 1 for 1, which we do pretty well, and we are playing some board wipes to get 2 and 3 for 1 some of the time, but for the most part, most of our answers are 1 for 1, and we can't keep that up until turn 14 without getting a refill somewhere along the way. We got to keep the pressure up. We got to keep piling answers into our hand, and these are actually surprisingly good at doing that while still filling out the need to have sorceries in the deck so that we can get more things off of the second chapter of Conjecture. Now, the deck plays 26 lands, and I've actually considered a 27th. It's that important that we hit our drops all the way up until at least like 9 or 10 lands some of the time. So we've got to get those land drops. Let's play at least 26 lands. And as far as the sources go here, we've got both 17 red and 17 blue because we've got copious amounts of both colors in the deck. I want to hit them at about even. You know, I want to hit Sweltering Suns on turn 3, but I also want to be able to hit Disallow by turn 3, so at least 17 sources of both colors. But here's the sideboard, and there's a lot of cards in it, but it really just comes down to 3 different matchups: Control, Aggro, and the Mono Green Stompy deck. You know, we've got Chandra's Defeat, that's obviously against any deck pack in red. 3 more copies of Negate. This is for that Control matchup, again, just to help push through things, but also to help counter just about every single spell in their deck, too. A lot of their cards are dead against us game 1, but a lot of our cards are dead against them game 1 as well. So we need to bring in some Negates and help make sure that we don't have so many dead cards game 2. Essence Scatter is in there for an opposite reason. You know, I've already mentioned cards like Steel Leaf Champion, Galta, you know, everything in between, Hazaret, Ronus. There's a ton of creatures specifically, Rekindling Phoenix, the Scarab God. I could keep going on and on that we just don't want to resolve in the first place, and Essence Scatter is really good for making sure that never happens. We'll also play a second copy of Banefire because this translates into a threat against control decks, and why not have another threat against them in games 2 and 3. But we've also got a Jaya Ballard in there, mostly because this is a dream card for the deck, but I'm not entirely sure how competitive it is, and playing it in the main deck would defeat the purpose of a creatureless, planeswalker-less deck. You know, there's a lot of decks packing Vraska's Contempt, and again, low-to-the-ground creature decks that can just swarm our Jaya and kill it. Jaya would be pretty bad against, so I'm actually going to put this in the sideboard against very specific mid-rangey or grindy matchups where Jaya helps speed up the clock, which is sometimes really important, but she also helps us dig to get important cards in the first place. And finally, you see the 2 copies of Manny Faces there. Haven't played this card in a while, but it turns out this too is a good answer to otherwise unanswerable things. You know, this is also a way to, quote, answer a Carnage Tyrant just by copying it, you know, and you can get it back later. That's pretty nice. But it also answers Vinemare because it can copy it without actually targeting it. So this answers a bunch of cards, especially in mono green, that we're very, very bad against otherwise. But here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 65. Not too shabby, especially considering there are a couple of categories dragging the score down that we really don't care about. You know, we don't have a whole lot of offense to speak of. And we're obviously not a fast deck. I have made no mistake about that in this video. We don't expect speed going in or you'll be disappointed. You know, it's a turtley deck. You have to be patient to play it. It's relatively slow, but it gives you the ability to turn the corner multiple times in a game if you have to, because we overperform in categories like versatility, defense, and especially resiliency, because Mirari Conjecture allows us to recast sweepers and counter spells over and over multiple times in a game. You know, don't think that Conjecture's only real function in this deck is, you know, kicking a fight with fire and copying it, winning the game. It's not all gimmicks. You know, Conjecture is also an amazing card in terms of card advantage and value and letting you get counter spells back to help, again, just cinch the game up. Sometimes saying no is all you need to be able to do to crush their hopes. So this also gets back Hour of Devastation. Just being able to Hour of Devastation into Conjecture, get back Devastation, and have it in your hand for next time. That is also super soul-crushing to a lot of aggro opponents. So sometimes they'll just scoop to that because they don't want to play the rest of the game out. This deck doesn't have a whole lot of ways to win, but it sure has a lot of ways to keep control of the board until you actually can pull the win off. So try this thing out if you're interested in it. It's actually really low budget. This thing is way under $100. I think it's like $85, $86 on TCG Player right now, which is not a bad price, especially considering this deck is still more than playable past rotation. You lose a couple of pieces, but the main pieces like Conjecture, Fight with Fire, Banefire, all of those are still in the format, plus all the things that draw you cards. We'll be able to switch to Shock and Lightning Strike. There are plenty of replaceable elements in this deck. So try this thing out because it's going to have some legs even post-rotation. You can play it for a good long time, and it's relatively cheap to buy it. And if you're interested in doing that, just remember, click the first link in the description. That'll take you over to my buds at TCG Player. They help sponsor my content, so they're good folks in that way. But they're also cool because they are the cheapest place you can get this deck or just about any dang old deck of Magic cards on the interwebs. So check out their website. Click the first link in the description if you want to view the deck list or get any pieces from it. But aside from that, I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out. So on your way out, do the YouTube stuff, click the like button, puts me in more recommended feeds. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Ring the bell for the notifications. Don't forget to share the video. If you don't do that, that actually helps me more than just about anything you can do, and I never ask you to do it, but I actually think this deck deserves for people to know that it exists. So share this around the inner sphere, and I think that there's probably other stuff you can do, right? Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev if you're interested, or if you like my content and my face, or if you hate my face but like my content, consider donating to the Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description down there for you. All I ask is $1 a month. I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we do them, and you can participate in polls and stuff to vote on what decks you want to see in the season. There's a lot of cool reasons to be a member of the Patreon, so go over there, click the link in the description if you want to help me out. But I'm pretty sure that's all I've got for this one, and I know I talked about it for a good long while. That's because I've gotten in a lot of reps with this deck, Again, I've been wanting to show you this thing since the beginning of the season, but I've had like 3 extra weeks of playtime with it, so that's caused me to have a good amount of faith in this deck. I actually think this thing might be the real deal, so try it out if you can. But in the meantime, I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love, and be kind.
I am best friends with Cooper Sephiroth and Dr. Wily, always smiley, but my thoughts are red just like my Ozzy. We get it. It's always your own people, sometimes it's your own people. This is Silicon Stink Kid, I'm Orchid. I'm coming with more shit than your average dork kid. If this is Mario Kart, dude, I'm Bowser. I'm coming highway, plus my word is much louder.